Good morning, dear all. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second day of AgriFood Forum. Today I am dressed up more traditionally without a jacket, not because I don't respect the etiquette or the dress code, but we need to do our homework. Today, this is what I believe in, and to listen not to what is happening globally, but to think how can we contribute so the situation changes, so the agro-food sector transforms itself, and this pandemic, this crisis that is happening at the moment could help us in becoming more modern, newer, and to look differently into our everyday reality. So today I would like to think how and which approach we need to adopt to assess COVID-19 and where we would need to be. Because there are always two ways we can look into how to survive this period, and we will survive, or we could think how to get a breakthrough that COVID-19 contributed to. During the first day, we spoke how the representatives of the public sector see the current situation, what are the guidelines, what are the tools. Science representatives spoke yesterday and shared their thoughts how the food sector is going to look like. Today, I would like to speak about the pandemics itself and to ask you how and where can we learn about that. Let us speak about some time ago. A few hundred years ago, I wanted to talk for a little bit of what's happened some 100 years ago. And of course, I believe that pandemics are a huge crisis for the society, a huge impact, but we cannot change that. There were crises, there were pandemics, but what can we learn from those? Well, historically, we can take the Black Death that took 200 million lives. First of all, masks were invented that would protect the doctors from the perioral infection some 500 years ago. The second thing is that many people died then, and there was a lack of labor. And then everybody started appreciating the labor, the time, and that's why during the Black Death, the middle class was formed, and which currently amounts to the biggest part of our labor force. Shakespeare spoke about the Black Death. He wanted to self-isolate. The theaters were closed. He started writing poems. Even in art, new things can be born because we get out of our comfort zone. If we started speaking about the Spanish flu 100 years ago, everybody compares the situation to the Spanish flu. The reactions, the approaches were similar. Apart from some 500 million died, but the world started vaccinating. And up till now, we are waiting for the COVID-19 vaccine that would help us to come back from the virtual reality into conferences, meetings, drinking coffee, exchanging views, and so on and so forth. So vaccination. If we were to go a bit further, we had HIV or AIDS pandemics. So, what has the world learned? Before we learned about social distance during the HIV crisis, we learned that being
very intimate with each other, we have to also be safe. Therefore, the era of protection started then. And SARS virus affected mostly Southeast Asia. And in Southeast Asia, they were isolated and blocked. Schools, cafes did not work. In 2000, there were not such technologies as we have today. But people really needed to buy food, to buy household items, and because they needed to spend a lot of time at home. So the predecessor of SARS, SARS became one of the driving factors why the internet and e-commerce evolved. For example, Alibaba. So from what I'm trying to say is that each pandemic has its own character or nature that affects what's happening in the area of work or digital reality. So what is the crisis of COVID-19? It could be called a modern pandemic or a digital breakthrough, because now I'm speaking here with you on Friday morning. The majority of you are in your home, in your office, in your car, or walking around the park and with your dog. So in fact, this year has brought about changes in our habits, in our everyday life. We spend a lot of time at home and communicate only in social media. Japanese companies said that the meaning of offices is changing radically. They don't intend to close them, but while before it was a given that people come to an office to work, today large corporations and famous brands say that offices will be anonymized. This means that offices will become creative workshops where people come to talk, exchange opinions, and discuss new projects and new initiatives. And then when they come back to their regular place of work, continue their regular work. So times are changing and there are more and more digital technologies coming around. The question now is, how is the digitization going to impact the agri-food sector, and what has changed in this sector, because we're all here because of it. So today, as I'm talking to you, I have remembered the Bitcoin, and I decided to talk about it. Bitcoin has reached more than $19,000. I'm not advertising cryptocurrency, but I would like to give it to you as an example, because as you probably remember, in 2018, everybody talked about it, from taxi drivers to fast food restaurant waiters. It was a boom of Bitcoin currency. In a year's time, their price dropped more than 4 times per year. A lot of people lost money, became unhappy, they lost property, and so on. Let's not come back to this. But if we looked at the figures that I found and summarized several annual reports of hedge funds, the situation is that since 2010 until 2020, in general, in the world, about 40 billion euro has been invested into agri-food sector. And the data for the first 3 quarters of 2020, we can see that more than 9 billion has been invested into agri-food sector, which constitutes about 23-30% of all the decade's investment into this area. What does this mean? This means that the amount of money that is now being directed towards agri-food industry and technologies, digital technologies, is beating every record. One of the reasons is that while being at home, self-isolating, we have understood how food supply chains and food preparation and packaging is important to us. A fact that skipped our attention before, and especially so that we accumulate everything at home. This is one of the so-called bubbles or trends that the more you talk, the bigger it becomes. On the other hand, it seems that the market is ready for this, because for the past 6 or 5 years we have been really talking much about agri-food technologies. I remember the concept of precise agriculture. This concept came about in the US back in 1960s, 90s, and we're still talking about them. But how many are implemented in the market and how many are efficient? So to continue in this vein, I would like to use the concept that today, at the end of the third quarter of 2020, we have reached the beginning of the end. After all the talks, discussions in the public and private sector about how important agri-food technologies are, we have finally started seeing large financial injections being made into this sector. The statistics is quite interesting. Therefore, I included it into this slide because I believe it very clearly shows the trends, what our life is going to be in the future. So first of all, if we took the patch between 2010 2019 and the so-called exit deals, when business owners would sell their companies to large companies, consortia, or funds, and acquisitions would be thus made. So it amounted to almost 2 billion euros. Now, if we take a look at how many transactions took place this year, they were more than 6 billion when companies changed hands. This means that we have achieved 3 times a larger indicator in less than a time, as compared with the past 9 years in general. Another important thing is that has never happened in the area of agri-food sector, in the area of innovation and digitization, is the so-called MEG rounds. These are not investments into startups, not investments into growing companies, but investments that begin from 100 million. That means that one injection into capital is 1 million euros. I saw that this year the average size of MEG rounds was 300 to 400 million into one company. The majority of these companies operate in the area of agriculture and food, food chain, packaging, proteins, non-meat sector producers, and so on. This means that investors and the market is ready and has identified, if I can put it this way, the stars or the market players who have already shown and proved something and achieved results. Because before we would see that there are very, very small micro or macro investments into a lot of companies. It resembles crumbles on the table. So the crumbling was taking place for 9 years. And it appeared that those who managed to realize the importance of these investments have taken the market share. And now they are getting back the mega investments in order to enlarge their geographic position and the market share. So what I'm telling you now and sharing with you, I believe, is positive. And we can learn from this. We can see the trends and for forecasting. But again, this forum and all of you behind the screens are probably professionals in the agro or food industry. And the sad figure depicted in this slide is that agro-technologies have been invested in with 7% of all the capital. Why? Because we are talking about how farmers and agriculture are so important to us every day, because if there was nobody to grow food for us, we would starve. But again, on the other hand, this year and the billions of investments have shown very clearly that innovations are being developed and digitized there where there is a huge market demand. And if one day it turns out that we cannot step out of our home to go to a supermarket or go to a restaurant and eat there, although it wants to, solutions have to be here and now. When we're talking about traditional agriculture, it seems that it's a very traditional, very long-lived business branch where people are used to work according to certain methods, traditions, have a lot of experience. This is a business of generations. And it turns out that here, technology developers, digitization enthusiasts, and so on, try to sell the idea to them that they have to digitize. The market is not shouting and screaming that if the wheat is being grown without analysis and drones, we will not buy them. Of course, it's not that important. Therefore, today, investment into agro-technologies are much smaller than investment into food innovations and new foods, new recipes, new business models about how the food should move around the world. But this is the future that we're talking about today. Now, if we focused more on the domestic level, before this forum, we had 2 hackathons. One of them was very interesting because it lasted not as usual for 2 days on weekend. This year it was on Zoom, but anyway, where young people try solving challenges, problems, or create new concepts. But one of the hackathons organized by us was international and lasted for 6 weeks with various mentors, advice given, technologists, hedge fund professionals, all kinds of specialists that helped the teams to achieve their goal. Otherwise, to create a concept that could change our lives for the better. More than 20 teams took part. And, by the way, last year, when we had this hackathon, we had 1 foreigner out of 70 people who physically took part in the hackathon because he fell in love and married a Lithuanian woman. But this year, the teams that registered in the Lithuanian hackathon were from Southeast Asia, Africa, and from 7 different EU member states. So that's digitization for you. What opportunities are opened and without even stepping out of your office or university or home. So it's very interesting. But the thing I wanted to share with you is that the winners who were solving challenges and the categories of challenges are totally different from what we're used to seeing in previous events. Because I had the honor to be in the jury in various hackathons in many countries, I saw a very clear element this year. People are trying to create a response to a problem that we have started seeing this year. One of the key things where most of the teams were participating is localized food supply and labor cost reduction. The majority of EU member states have felt this year and identified that as the pandemic began, some people who were not members or citizens of that country left, and there was a natural lack of human resources for lower paid jobs in the area of agriculture, primary materials. So the question is what to do. The conclusion is that robotization could be one of the ways out that would help us reduce the imbalances of labor demand. Food waste and processing of it is also a topic relevant to young and talented people this year because of interrupted food supply chains, because of unmanaged law on supply and demand. A lot of agricultural produce was simply thrown out or destroyed because it was not possible to sell it. But there was food lost as well. Let us remember that the majority of the world still needs food and still feel the lack of it. Now, about the future. This is my personal opinion, but based on historic data, it seems that we are going to this. So I divided it into two post-COVID stages. The first stage is the bursting of the bubble. As we are now used to see, when we open a news portal or a newspaper, we used to seeing news about COVID every day. Sooner or later, it will stop. And when this is no longer top news and everybody's used to this, the majority of initiatives and actions that are being done today will turn out to be unnecessary. So when I'm talking that a lot of money will be lost, first of all, I have in mind hedge funds, investors, business angels that invest in technologies and companies, but the money lost should be repeated in the chain reaction throughout the economy. And this could be seen as an inevitable thing. And we could just know that the money will be lost and be sad about it, or we could take a different perspective. Let's remember the dot-com crisis of 2000. It was exactly the same. Everything that started with www would get investment. Everybody would talk about it. Internet was the number one topic of discussions. And then the majority of technology companies simply went bankrupt. But is any one of you today, and I am one of you, can imagine our lives without a smartphone, a browser, social networks, and even, let's come back once again to this forum, it's only thanks to the internet that we are able now to speak with you or listen to one another and to share opinions and find out new things. So each crisis and each bubble in some time brings about something useful. Even the Bitcoin crisis, when people lost a lot of money, has evolved that 4 years later, digital money and digital banks have become reality. In Lithuania, it is quite normal to use electronic signature. I recently made a transaction with one Singapore company, and for 1 month we tried to agree how to sign a contract. Because in such a modern country, they do not have an electronic signature. So there are many regions who are seemingly very progressive but still lack something. So I believe that the COVID crisis is going to be the one after which a lot of startups, initiatives, and technologies that want to change our habits will burst, but certain things will stay, and they will improve our life in the future. And the second stage is more long-term, and I believe that in the second post-COVID stage, we will be able to see what is the value and transformation of the agri-food market has taken place because of this pandemic.
First of all, I do believe that there will be a huge disparity gap between the manufacturing sites, production sites, and what we see now, because we see that the meat is grown in the labs at the moment, food is grown in the labs, and traditional agriculture, typical agriculture, will become luxury good, a luxury item. Maybe we would like the apple to be grown in a real garden and be environment friendly, organic, and not be grown in mass production is grown. Well, now we see the trend of urbanization in Europe, especially this year more, but last year I used to travel in the Netherlands, in Spain, and I saw how 24/7 the greenhouses were serviced by the systems, by the robots that were spraying fertilizers, taking the harvest. So with robots, we will be able to avoid the lack of the labor force or surplus, because the world is in shock. Do we need to isolate itself? We can be here, we can't be. How we are going to manage the work? Is it going to be distance or not? More and more companies, previously under testing conditions and now alive, really start growing meat from plants, from fiber, from plants. And previously I used to say that food is going to taste like meat. And so we're coming to that reality. My colleague Paulius said that in Lithuania you can buy meat from mushrooms. COVID was a catalyst, or just something that encouraged transformation. And as I've mentioned, that digitalization is a luxury item. Now, without digitalization, we will not be able to move forward. So let us now discuss why Lithuania is. This is the picture that was made 1 year ago during AgriForum, when stakeholders, business representatives, public representatives, forum partners, we are all together and signed the digitalization declaration, where we expressed our wish that we want to see Lithuania sustainable, green, and the country that on the global level could be seen as the generator catalyst of digitalization. So what have we done in a year? Has it remained as just on paper, or we did something in the I think we made a huge leap forward. So now you see that we have international clusters, structures that are speaking not about digitalization, but are involved in that. So the instruments, the possibilities started generating. And once we started speaking about the generation of quality, creation of quality, and what we need to do to generate this quality, we identified a few sectors. There were startups, there were different sectors, but I believe that here you see a view that when everybody needs to do something good in order to create the value. But this is not working, because one side expects from the other more, and it seems that we're all waiting and we are thinking that somebody is going to initiate the first step, generate the value, and we would be able to join the actions and the initiatives. But this is not going to happen. Today we would be speaking face-to-face. If there was no direction to accept the quarantine rules, to close all the events, to wear masks. So it seems that we, as a part of the society, need a certain kind of direction, incentive, rules, and something going forward. If our elected representatives started from the vision how we as social partners could help them, and then this cooperation could include science representatives, we could exchange our views, only then we can hope for digital transformation. So our colleagues will speak from public sector again. We need to become responsible and get involved into this process. And if we spoke about a very important part of the ecosystem, this would be the best result of this forum. We are a small country and we can be picky. We either have to survive and the COVID-19 will end. Maybe the crisis will end next year once we have the vaccine. Do we want to be passive observers, or we start being active, proactive breakthrough givers? We have all the conditions in our country in the field of agro-innovations, technologies, and so on and so forth. So let us get together and make Lithuania known, sustainable, green, innovative. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the